Welcome to the new Mission Career Transition Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Caprellian. I'm joined by my sister, HR Pro and co-host, Alexandra Caprellian. And today's guest is Samantha Gassman. She is a senior communications manager for a Fortune 100 company, has Air Force experience. She's a military spouse. She's an author. She is a jack of many trades, and she has a lot of great information to provide those that are preparing for their own transition. So stay tuned. Samantha Gassman, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome.
Yeah, calling from Alabama, where it must be feeling, we were just talking about this. It's pretty warm down there.
It's hot and humid. It's getting into the season.
Okay. Yeah. Birthplace of the Air Force, though, right?
Put me on the spot right away. I'm not totally sure of the history.
But
September 18th, 1947 is about the only date I can rattle off as far as the Air Force history is concerned.
Well, it's all good. It's all good. I just know there's a large Air Force presence down in Alabama. So
yes, huge.
As I noticed in your bio, it says British born.
Yes.
So you've probably got an interesting history. I'm kind of wondering where you grew up and how you joined the military.
Well, the first question I usually get around that is, are your parents military? And the answer to that question is no. I get that a lot because people, for some reason, can't understand why people are born in other countries unless it's associated with the military. So no, neither of one of my parents served either in the British military or in the U.S. military. They were British citizens. They were born and raised in England, and then they had me, and then I would live there until I was 8 years old. At that point, my dad had a chance to move with his company, and they gave him the opportunity to move to the States, to New Zealand, or to Australia. And at that time, we had very distant family living out in the Bay Area in California, so we opted to move stateside. And every now and then, I think about how it would have been so different had my parents chosen any other of those locations. I could have been an Aussie or a Kiwi, or, I don't even know what other alternate life plans there are out there for like alternate versions of Sam, but we ended up settling in the States. And then I was the first in my family to become a U.S. citizen. And I did so that I could join ROTC and go to their summer field training. And then I commissioned in 2008, and then my parents followed suit with their citizenship. And my brother was still at the age where he became a citizen as a result of theirs. And so we all became U.S. citizens. And then both myself and my brother entered the armed services.
Wow. So you were it sounded like you were in from the get-go.
I guess, yeah. I do have my two grandfathers actually served in the British military. So I've got one who was in the Army, one who's in the Royal Air Force.
Okay. Why Air Force? What attracted you to the Air Force?
So I did grow up in the Bay Area for a few years, but I consider Colorado home because that's where I spent the most time. Colorado has a ton of Air Force bases. The Air Force Academy was right up the road from me. In fact, I could see it from my old middle school, and my high school graduation happened in their large gymnasium. Took several tours there, went to multiple football games. And so on the periphery, the Air Force was always kind of in the background, even though I didn't consider it to be a career option until a little bit later when I was looking at colleges and considering, what type of classes to take. And the thing that really attracted me to the ROTC program was you can try it out for a couple of years. And if it works out, great, you can commission into the military and have your career. Or since I wasn't on scholarship, I could try it out. And if I decided I didn't like it, no harm, no foul. There was really no consequence for me not being on a scholarship contract. So when I joined, I just became really nerdy and enamored with everything military. Some people really hate drilling. I thought it was fantastic. I loved it. I love the whole notion of can't crack your bearing. And as a Brit, I'm naturally stoic, so I excelled at that. And, so it was just, I don't know, I was just having a whale of a time. And if you looked up ROTC nerd in the dictionary, my face would be right there because I did all the things. Like, and it's so funny looking back because I didn't realize at the time that you could just show up to the classes and just show up to leadership lab and like commission and graduate. I was like, nope, I'm going to do Arnold Air and I'm going to do Honor Guard and I'm going to do Wing Commander and all this other stuff. And I was just fully embracing the lifestyle of the Air Force. And, you know, we went on base visits and I was just enraptured with everything that I saw. And so it is pretty geeky and nerdy, like when I look back on it, especially all the pictures and, you know, the ribbons and all that stuff. But it was, I don't know, it just seemed to be a really natural fit. I really liked the discipline of it. I appreciated the chain of command, even though I was a bit cheeky in a lot of my responses to upperclassmen and cadre, which was noted multiple times during my time there. But yeah, just generally, I felt I came from an Air Force town. I was surrounded by Air Force bases. And when it came to make a career decision, I don't know, it just made sense at the time to go that route. And it ended up working out because I graduated during the Great Recession when many of my peers were struggling to find employment. And I bypassed all of that by commissioning directly into the military and having a guaranteed job after graduation, which, especially at that time, was a welcome blessing.
Okay. Wow. Well, hey, geeks win. Like, geeks win.
Nerd for the win.
Yeah, nerd for the win.
We're all
the way.
Weird in our own way, and that was definitely part of my weirdness.
Oh, that's great. Now, I noticed that you have I think you graduated with a liberal arts degree and then ended up becoming a combat systems officer.
Mm-hmm. And that makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah, it makes. Well, I'm inspired. I'm inspired. Poli-sci major right here. You know?
Yeah, international relations, but same thing. It was, you know, basically a conglomerate of a whole bunch of different stuff.
And yeah, and so you were a combat systems officer on an MC-130 gunship, is that right?
MC-130P Combat Shadow. The gunship is the AC-130.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right. I missed either way. Like amazing platforms.
Yes.
Like amazing platforms. And they're typically involved in special operations missions. Do I have that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. And so, you know, I'd just like to know, you had this career and were you a dual active military spouse? Did you meet your husband while you were on active duty or?
Yes, I did. But we got married after I'd already left the Air Force. So we were never married on active duty together at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good call. You know, I don't know how they do it. I know a couple of dual active duty military spouses, and I don't understand how they even make it work. They do, like they're amazing people,
right? And that was actually one of the reasons why I got out. Is I had that same perception. I was like, I've seen it work. I don't know how well it works. Marriage is hard enough without the military. I can't imagine trying to combat or try to mitigate like different careers and figure out who takes priority and all of that. And I just didn't want to mess with that. I had enough experience at that point where I'm like, yeah, that's not the lifestyle that I really want.
Yeah. Well, and everybody has their reason actually. And that kind of leads to my next question. So just talking about your transition, did you always know you were going to do like maybe not be a careerist, or what was your decision point? How did your decision to transition out of the military manifest?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because I went into the Air Force with the intention to do a career. 20 years, I'm like mid-40s during retirement. That sounds awesome. Like, yes, please sign me up. And so I had every inclination and intention to put in the full 20 years. However, at the 8-year mark, not only was my NAV commitment up or well up by that point, because I only owed 6 years, but my aircraft, the MC-130, actually retired. So the platform was done. They were introducing a new platform called the MC-130J. And I actually had the opportunity to take 2 aircraft from Hurlburt Field, Florida, over to the Boneyard to have it retired, which is a very strange experience. I kind of liken it to if you've ever had a pet that you had to put down. Like, it's like,
gosh, that's depressing.
It's like you know what's happening to it, but like the pet doesn't know what's happening to it. So
no.
I hate to anthropomorphize the aircraft, but I think everyone does, right? Like it becomes like part of the family, a friend, if you will. And so when we took it to the boneyard, it was like, bye plane, like have a nice life. Anyway, I digress severely, but so the aircraft was retiring, and my choices at that point professionally were, transition to the J model, transition to the MC-130H Talon, which was still around at the time, or go to the gunship or the U-28 or some other platform that still had navigators. And I did consider it a lot. I thought about it very thoroughly because I wasn't totally sure if I wanted to give up the Air Force at that point. But it kind of worked out to be kind of a natural close to my career, because it's like my commitment was done, the aircraft was done. I would have had to requalified, gone through a whole bunch more training to go and get requalified on a new aircraft, reestablish myself in a new squadron, get reacclimated to a new mission. And I was like, I could do that. That's definitely an option too. And plenty of people in my situation did, because of course every aircrew member in the shadow community faced that choice. But simultaneously for me personally, I was with my now husband, and things between us were going the serious route. And I thought, I'm in my late 20s. I don't think that the military to mil relationships necessarily work that great, at least maybe not for me, given my career field and his career field. And I was getting to be 28, 29, 30, and my body was like, you don't have all the time in the world to do this family thing if you're interested in that. And so it just made sense to me from a personal perspective and from a professional perspective to throw in the towel at that point and say, I had a good run. My aircraft is done. Maybe I should follow suit and go the way of the boneyard.
Yeah. Well,
hopefully not, but
we're still keeping it dark. We're on a trend. No,
I guess so.
No, it's all good. Well, I mean, it just seems like everything seems to align and point in a very clear direction of what is best for you at the time.
Yeah.
I can relate. I can relate. That's why things are kind of aligning for me as well. So you knew you wanted to get out. What was your game plan? Did you have a game plan, and what was the actual transition like for you?
Well, I think, like many of us, I was overly confident in my ability to transition. I saw it more as like the next PCS versus this major life shift. I think I really downplayed and underestimated the impact of that decision, because it's strange. You go from assignment to assignment being told where to go and what to do and where you're going to be stationed, and you have this entity that basically dictates your life to you, and the elements of your life that are most important. And so when I went to go and leave, because it was partly driven with my husband's or my fiance's next assignment, it was kind of like we were still PCSing, but I was just in a different role. And so I was not as thoughtful in my transition as I realized I should have been. I had a job secured following my terminal leave. I was going to go and be a contractor. I was going to work on a base still. Like I pretty much made it as close to a PCS as possible. I was going to work on a base. I was going to be a contractor. I was going to work alongside my Air Force peers. I was going to keep doing Air Force-y type stuff. I even took a role that was basically my job in the military, but on the civilian side, because my last assignment, in the Air Force was as an executive officer for a commander. And so my first role as a contractor was working in the Director's Action Group, basically doing exec work, but as a civilian. And so I guess because of all those factors, I didn't put much stock into it. And the day of my separation, following terminal leave, kind of came and went, and there was just nothing to it. I don't really remember the day as being particularly memorable. I didn't have like a clear bookend with which to discontinue my service. It wasn't like, okay, and today is the day. And I didn't do much of that. And I think looking back, I really wish that I'd been more deliberate in closing out that chapter, because I remember leaving Hurlburt Field and seeing the base in my rear view mirror, my side view mirror, and thinking like, this is the last time I will leave a base as an active duty member. But that was kind of the extent of my, introspection on that. And so, my transition, I was lucky to have things fall into place for me. But I would be lying if I said it was all done deliberately as part of
Okay.
some master plan.
Okay. What was that first job like when you got out?
I did not enjoy that first
Hmm.
role. I stayed there for 6 months, and it wasn't necessarily even the role. I just wasn't in the right mental place to take on a job like that. And the reason is I was still way too ingrained in the military culture. And my ego, and I'll be the first to admit it was my ego that couldn't handle not being on the inside anymore. I wasn't
Yeah.
wearing a uniform. I wasn't regarded as, a captain. I wasn't looked to as an expert or a SME or, any of those things. And that was really hard to kind of start at the bottom, but be in an organization that was so familiar to me. I didn't just come in off the street and become a contractor. Like, I came from the active duty world, and then kind of making that even more difficult was the fact that I came from special operations. Everyone's, related to aviation. They're very mission focused. And where I went, it was still mission focused, but it was in a different area of the business in the Air Force. It was within the Space Command at the time. And that's just a completely different mindset. It's very, the culture is different. And so not only was I on the outside looking into a world that I was just a part of like yesterday, but the whole mission of the place was different, and my role was very different. And so I didn't last very long as a contractor. I had some struggles, with fitting in and like understanding my new place as a civilian, but this recently transitioned veteran. And it was hard for me to let go that that active duty perception of myself. Like, well, don't you know, I was just in, and I did this, and when I was a captain, and when I deployed, and it was like, no one cares. Like, that's not relevant anymore. I was at a briefing in the community with a couple of folks who worked in the area, and one of them worked at a Fortune 100 A&D company that was local to where we were. And he handed me a business card and said, hey, if you ever want to come and do something cool, give me a call. So I said, okay, that sounds great. And as it became clear to me that the contractor role wasn't the right fit, I became more and more interested in this other company. And so fortunately, I was able to make that transition.
Like manna from heaven.
Exactly.
Can my transition work out like that? I don't know.
I know. It was very fortuitous in its nature. So again, I can't take any credit really for the planning.
Well, but being in the right place at the right time, a lot of times I think people undercredit themselves for like kind of the work that they're doing and putting themselves in the right place. One of the things that I became your follower on LinkedIn because it was, I remember the post. I remember the post that you made.
Uh-oh.
No. It was,
Call
you
out.
know, no, it was great. Like, because you would, first of all, I was going to say it later. I'll say it now. I am just captivated by your storytelling skills. You have the amazing ability to tell a story and provide valuable information without ever going down a negative narrative. And it's very vulnerable, very humble, and also most importantly, it's very informative. And the thing that I found informative was your discussion on how it's okay if the first job you get isn't exactly the best fit. You know, it's okay to figure out where that next career ends up leading you. And I look through, and you admitted it was a reflective of your own experience. I mean, just looking, and I trolled your LinkedIn resume, started with project manager, aviation consultant, then transitioned to HR. And now you're a senior communications manager for this Fortune 100 company.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain kind of like how you made these micro transitions and kind of the evolution of understanding what works for you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I want to start off with a story from when I was a young kid. When I was 5 years old, I was up in the middle of the night and I could not go to sleep because I was so concerned that I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. This was very pressing to me at that age because in my young brain, and even today, I was so confused by all the different options out there, and I was overwhelmed by the number of things that people can become and things that they can do. And I ran into my parents' bedroom and I woke them up, and I don't know what time, but as a parent myself, I'm sure it was not favorable to their sleep schedule. And I was like, Mommy, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And I remember she said, that's nice. You don't have to worry about it right now. Please go back to your bed. And to me, I didn't understand. I was like, no, you don't get it. This is really important. Like, this is pressing. I need to figure this out because I need to know what to do with my life. And again, as a parent myself, I have to laugh because I have taken so many steps and like deviations off any type of path that I thought I was following. And so this was before we moved to the States, which, as I mentioned before, put me on a whole other trajectory that guaranteed wouldn't have happened had I stayed in the UK or if we'd moved to, down under, if we'd gone to Kiwi land. So, and no offense to any of those folks, I love you all. But so starting off was, the decision to join the Air Force. That put me on a trajectory to be in the military, which has shaped and informed a lot of the experiences and the perceptions that I have now. I feel like it made me a stronger, more resilient person. I feel like it gave me life experiences that are really, truly unmatched. You do not get to be in charge of, a $75 million airplane and a crew of 8 when you're 22 years old in any other career field ever outside the military. In fact, it's terrifying to me that they allowed a bunch of 20-somethings to go fly these airplanes around and get shot at and, have these experiences in other countries when we were likely too immature to have a good grasp on all what that meant. So I guess when I think about my career path, it is very non-linear. Certainly there was a linear aspect to it when I was in the military. You progress, you do what you need to, you get the education, you have the right experiences, you move up in rank. And had I stayed in, I would have probably, I hope that I would have made major, and I maybe would have been a director of operations, and maybe at some point had a squadron. And that is all very laid out for you. When I left and I joined the civilian workforce, I was looking for that same pyramid, that same career path plan that says, okay, Sam, now that you've done this, you should try this and progress and do that. And there is none. Mm-hmm. So rude awakening there. It's all up to you. And I think for a lot of veterans, that can be extremely overwhelming because you go from this very disciplined and laid out environment where things are kind of planned for you. You have a say into how your career goes, certainly, and you may have desires for how it goes. But the reality is your career is at the helm or at the whims of what the service needs and the service requirements. And so your job is chosen based on that in a lot of cases. You PCS based on that. You move up based on that. And so having this plethora of choice kind of brought me back to being 5, going, oh my gosh, I have no idea what to do. And so you see this strange kind of deviation in and out of all these career fields, because that was me really figuring it out live on the job, what made sense for me. And I think a lot of veterans say, well, I managed all these things. We are given these multi-million-dollar budgets and people and organizations and tasks to get accomplished. Project management is the clear choice when I go to leave the military. And so, like many vets, I looked into that option and I looked at the certificate and I looked at the training and I was like, I could do that, but I'm not so sure that that's the right fit. So that's where you see that project manager position for, I don't remember how long, a little bit. And then I thought, this is a little too in the weeds, a little too technical. I'm not sure my brain is the best fit for that. I really want to get back to something that's more people oriented. My best assignment in the Air Force, where I felt the most valuable, was as a flight commander leading a flight of 70 young airmen, but young. They ranged between 18 and my chief, who was getting up there, and
grizzled.
Yeah,
seasoned.
He's seasoned. He was very seasoned and experienced, and but that was the best role because I really got to take care of the airmen, and like from everything that encapsulates. In the military, we have a very disruptive style of leadership where you are in their stuff on all levels, personal, professional, everything that's going on with them. And, those airmen, I feel like I had the most impact on. So going back to my civilian career, I was like, well, what's a flight commander in the civilian workforce? Like, what's the most close job I can get to taking care of people, being in their business, really helping them out? I was like, I know, HR. Like, that seems to be the place to be.
sis, you're laughing a little too hard.
Welcome to HR.
And I quickly realized that while I had a lot of good people leadership skills, that was not the only skill you need to succeed in HR. It turns out you need other skills that are more practical, like employee relations and compensation and performance management. And I was able to learn some of that on the job, but the reality was that given that I was a military spouse and moving around all the time, I couldn't be on site at my company to be there with the employees and to feel their experiences and to live them with them. So I couldn't be very effective in the HR organization. And I could not move up in that organization because I couldn't guarantee that I would be on site because I worked remotely. And I didn't want to, lie and say, oh yeah, sure, I'll be, whatever site, because we just never know where we're going to be. So then I had to figure out my next move. And it started to dawn on me that the things that I enjoy most, the times when I am most enthralled with what I'm doing, where I'm in that flow state, is when I'm being creative. And unfortunately, I can't make a career out of doing lousy watercolors, but what I can do is make a career out of public speaking and media and writing and storytelling. And in the civilian workforce, they call that communications. And so I started looking in the comms function and started working with some colleagues that I had in that function to understand more about what they did. And I started writing for my company's magazine to get a flavor for how they wrote and the storytelling angle and the processes, and also to get those relationships going so that they could kind of give me a nudge and a wink when I did my interviews. And so I found myself in pursuing communications, which I started off doing about 4 years ago. And I finally feel 8 years after I transitioned that I'm with my people, that this is the function that I can truly learn and grow within. And it's something that is more closely aligned to the real Sam and not Captain me or, pretending to be someone me or any of those things. It really is the closest reflection of who I am and who I want to be going forward.
No, that's an amazing journey.
Yeah.
It's an amazing journey
all over the place.
It's a great journey of self-discovery, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sam, I just would like to know a little bit more about what it means to be in communications. I'm thinking A6 or S6, but and then I know it's not that. And then my only other tangible understanding is looking at our comms or PAO office, which is what they used to be called. What does it mean to be a manager in communications?
So you're right. I think I even had to have this discussion with my husband, because when he thinks communications, he's like, you're not fixing IT problems. I'm like, you're right. That's not what I do. I'm not in there setting up the SCIF computers by any means. So no, it is more closely aligned to the PAO offices within the military. And in fact, a lot of my colleagues in my function are prior PAOs in the various services. So yes, it is more to do with storytelling, it's internal communications, it's all employee messages, it's newsletters, it's intranet strategy, it's everything that employees consume in terms of internal content, and even some on the external side. So I do help out sometimes with, our social media. While there is a team that handles the company side, I actually write for the vice president that I support. I ghostwrite for her. And so it's kind of all those things. And what I really love about the function is there's so many different career fields kind of encapsulated into one. So, it's media relations, which is talking to the media, understanding how to kind of craft the narrative of your company and tell them what they need to know without divulging too much. And so it's kind of like when you go through survival training and, you learn the interrogation techniques. When I was media trained just the other day, I was like, a lot of this sounds familiar. It's like, stay in your circle, bridge to what you want to talk about. Don't answer things that you're not supposed to. I was like, I feel like I've learned this before, but under much more different circumstances, much more stressful circumstances. So there's that. There's, from a brand perspective, it's, protecting and enhancing the company brand with, again, storytelling, showing up in the right places in terms of conference and talent acquisition and that kind of thing. It's all of those things. We also have a team that helps with our CEO and leadership comms. So ensuring that our CEO is showing up in the right places and saying the right things. And so yeah, my team is mostly internal focused, but we do have an external component as well.
Yeah, still pretty impressive, like as far as the complexity behind managing communications internal to an organization. But clearly a lot of writing. And I know that you're an author of 3 books, 3 children's books.
Yes.
So where did you get your inspiration to write children's books?
Similar to my other kind of random tangents within my career, when my son was born, about 6 years ago, I was reading a lot of picture books, a lot. And I enjoyed them. I thought they were fun. They often rhymed. They were cute. And they had great underlying messages sometimes. Other times they were just silly and they made my son laugh. And I loved the broad nature of them, how they could really cover anything in a kid-friendly way. And it can help open conversations with children about maybe difficult subjects. It can make them belly laugh. It can just be a silly moment that's shared between mother and son, or mother and daughter. And I just thought, I bet I could write a children's book. And I found out that it turns out a lot of parents think that, and a lot of people try to do that because they look at the simplicity of a children's book and they go, I could write Little Blue Truck. Look how easy it is to put that together. Or, The Hungry Caterpillar. And when I started learning more about the industry and getting rejected by agents and publishers, I found out very quickly that it's not quite as easy as I thought. And so I ended up doing a lot of research. I joined a professional organization to help me learn more about the children's book industry. I attended webinars. I wrote a lot more. I joined a critique group. I was, pitching in Twitter pitch contests, which is a big thing out on the platform formerly known as Twitter, now X. And I just was learning a ton. And I got really, I don't know, I learned so much that I felt like I was in a good position to start pitching and querying agents again. And my first children's book is called Dear Rainbow Baby. It was published by a small press out in Texas called Clear Fork Publishing. And as you may understand from the name of the book, it is a very personal one to me because it's called Dear Rainbow Baby. And rainbow babies are those children who are born after miscarriage. And so that unfortunately was based on personal experience where in 2019, I had a miscarriage. And part of the grieving process for me was writing. That seems to be my natural tendency, is to, when things get squirrely up in my brain, it's easy to just, it helps and it's cathartic to start writing. And so part of that writing ended up being part of the manuscript for this book, which helped me kind of pivot from the sadness of the situation and look to the future with hope and kind of think about, what could be in the future. And so again, fortuitous timing, because the book was acquired a couple of weeks before my rainbow baby was due. And then the book was published on her birthday, which is also National Rainbow Baby Day. And so all these things collided into this beautiful mess, really, of just, celebrating baby's birthday and this book coming out. And so that was my kind of first foray into children's book writing. I've also been published on the educational market, which is, I learned, separate from the commercial market. If you ever have a Scholastic book fair in your kid's school, Scholastic and other publishers are part of the educational market, and they're always looking for like leveled readers and what they call, the pre-leveled reading books, which have, a certain set of vocabulary and things for kids to progress in their reading. And I wrote a book called Honor Flight, which is related to the Honor Flight Network, which is a great nonprofit organization that takes World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam War veterans from their homes to the DC memorials to see the memorials that are there in their honor. It's a great organization. And so this book is about a girl, Mackenzie, and her grandfather, who she calls Papa, who was a U.S. Marine vet, and how they kind of traveled together to DC to see these memorials. That's only on the educational market, though. So if you happen to be a school teacher and you want to learn more about that, you can go to Benchmark Education and find it. And then the third one has not been published yet. It was supposed to come out this year, but we're not totally sure if we're going to meet that timeline because publishing is very much like a turtle and it moves incredibly slowly. It would be more interesting to watch molasses, I think, move across the table. But that one is called Peanut and Buttercup, a little bit lighter in nature than perhaps the other two books. And this is about Buttercup, who is a sassy racehorse getting ready for her first race, and her companion animal, Peanut, who is a googly-eyed, smelly goat. And it is the story of their unlikely friendship.
Cute.
So I think the message is you can do whatever you want when you leave the military, and just if you have enough passion, really the opportunities are endless. You don't have to pigeonhole yourself in your MOS or your AFSC or any of that. You can, if something interests you and you have the passion for it, you can go for it and be successful.
Still, it's a lot of work. I mean, you went through a lot.
Work.
Yeah, a lot of work. But I mean, if it's your passion, and clearly, like, I appreciate and respect the connection that you had between the thought of your initial motivation to write and understanding there was a connection between these books and the joy that you could bring to your child. Yeah, that's a pretty powerful connection and motivator.
Yeah, and it was really fun because last year when my son was in preschool, the class was doing a Veterans Day, celebration. And my son goes, "My mom wrote a book about the military." And his teacher, of course, is like, "Really?" And so they had me come in and read it to the kids. And that was the first time, because it's on the educational market, not a commercial book, that I'd gotten to read it to a group of kids that were the target audience for the book. And so it was really fun because, of course, my son knows the book, backwards and forwards. And it was a touching moment to see him, like, with his peers and, following along and reading. So it was great.
He was acting as your agent, huh?
He was. And he was like, "Let me tell you about this other book she's got. May I interest you in some watches?"
Here's a QR code.
Yeah. Have you ever owned a franchise? Would you like to?
Oh my goodness. Well, that's an amazing orientation on just kind of how dynamic you are. And there are things that we haven't really covered yet. I do want to transition a little bit to just kind of coaching the military transitioner that might be interested in doing some of the things that you're doing now. Mm-hmm. I get the sense that you've always had kind of a knack for writing. Is that true? Or were there skills that you developed, and how would one go about developing their skills in storytelling specifically? Because I know it's a very powerful skill to have in your pocket, whether it's in the interview or it's just, kind of working in communications.
Yeah, well, similar to training for your physical fitness test, the only way to get better at push-ups is to do push-ups. The only way to get better at writing is to do writing. Unfortunately, though, a lot of us have what we perceive to be a creative block, or an excuse of, well, I'm not creative, or I don't have time, or whatever the case may be. And I am certainly not immune to any of that. That certainly happens as well. But I would say that if you are interested in writing, storytelling, communications, and you're following folks who do it well on social, go from being a consumer of content to being an entrepreneur of content, and really trying to figure out, what is it about this particular person that makes their story stick with you? Is it the way that they tell it? Is it the voice? Is it the structure? And if you transition from consuming to being a more active participant, whether that's in books or social or whatever it is, and you start to pay attention to those things, you might notice some themes or some commonalities among the things that you're drawn to. And while I would never encourage anybody to plagiarize, being inspired by other people and, trying out different voices is all part of finding your own voice. And so the best thing you can do is to just try it out. Give yourself a small goal of 200 words or 500 words. And if it's too difficult to find a topic to write about initially, there's plenty of online prompts that you can use to just get yourself started. Or you can just, as I did, just start putting things out there and see what sticks. when I started posting on LinkedIn, it was right before I went out on maternity leave with my third child, because I needed another passion project to do in addition to that. And I just started putting things out on LinkedIn. And at first it was kind of random. It was like, I'm talking about morning routines, or I'm talking about being a mom, or I'm talking about whatever. And none of that was really catching any, it wasn't inspiring engagement. But when I started talking about transitioning out of the military and some of the challenges that veterans face, all of a sudden there's a lot of resonance. And all of a sudden there was a lot of engagement. And I realized that I actually have a lot to say about this, because I had been out for several years at that point, and I had been through this kind of topsy-turvy, unusual career path to find out what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. And so it kind of came organically insofar as I started scratching the surface of this lived experience, I found that I had many more stories to tell. And so similarly, for those who are listening, you may find that you uncover a passion through writing, and it may not be the first, second, or even seventh thing you write, but it may be as you find yourself more comfortable with your voice and the things that you have to say. Everyone has a story. You just need to figure out how to tell yours.
Another question I have for you regarding your experiences, you went from being on active duty in the Air Force to then strictly being the military spouse. What kind of lessons learned did you have from that transition process that maybe stood out to you?
My hardest lesson to learn was humility. As you might expect, I had a lot of ego being an AFSOC navigator. From the time that you go into nav training to the time you check out on your first aircraft, you're told and you learn that you're tip of the spear and you're amazing and you've got all these skills and, the Air Force needs you and yada, yada, yada. And that is great. And that's required because you don't want people that are not confident flying aircraft around. You actually need a bit of bravado, I think, to be crazy enough to go and fly these, very old aircraft out in war zones. So understood that part was required. But what it does to your psyche is your identity is inextricably linked with this, this perception of yourself, which is, strong and resilient and, all these great things. And so when you strip away that cool job and that flight suit and that bravado that you build up over the course of several years, and you are just, and I say that lightly, I'm doing quotations, just a military spouse, that transition for me was extremely difficult because, once again, similar to my contractor role, I found myself wanting to jump up and down, at events going, but I understand what you're talking about. Like I was there too, because when people would talk to my husband and me, they weren't really talking to me because I'm the spouse. They were talking to him and, talking about work and sharing challenges or concerns that they had. And I just wanted to be like, well, you could,
wow.
You could write your APR differently. And if you tried this, you could try that and da, 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 da. And so it was hard for me to be like, look, I'm no longer in the driver's seat of my career. My career has now taken a backseat because I am here to support my husband and our family. And so it really took a mindset shift for me to go from I'm the cool person with the cool job, with the cool flight suit, to now I am still cool, even though I'm a mom of 3 and
Still cool.
Still hip, right? But I'm serving in a very, very different way. And it is no less important than the active duty member. And I think I had to realize that for myself. Like, he couldn't do what he does if I were not here taking care of the rest. And when he was at our last assignment, he was deployed half the year, 150 days out of the year. And he told me as such, like, it would not be possible for him to go and do that had he not been comforted by the fact that I was home and, continuing everything on the home front. And so it is so crucially important for those spouses to have that confidence to know that your support is huge. Having been downrange myself and deployed and not having that support to now providing it myself, like I know that it means the world to our service members. And so it was this kind of coming to the recognition that it's still important. I am important, even if I'm not the one wearing the uniform, everything that I do is still serving that broader mission, which I, raised my right hand to serve many moons ago.
Sis, do you have any questions?
It's so hard to come up with questions when somebody that's so eloquently saying what she wants to say. I'm just, and the questions are already being answered, because one of them was, well, what tips and tricks would you give to, military spouses that, have to take that transition and take a step back? What would be a tip that you would give them? But you've already answered it, of just really realizing that this is an important mission that they're doing at the moment. And
you don't have to lose yourself to this definition of a military spouse. And I think we tend to find words or phrases to latch onto to identify us as people. I'm a mom. I'm a military spouse. I'm an active duty member. I'm a this or that. But you're so much more than that, right? Like, as a person, there's so many other facets to yourself. And I think part of me writing books for kids, like, yes, of course I wanted to share them with my children, but also a lot of it was like, this is my own little niche that I've carved out for myself that has nothing to do with the military or my spousal status or anything. It's something that I did that was for me, to kind of be truer to myself, to put something out there that I could be proud of, that was completely separated from these other titles and roles that I have. So to find that for yourself, to go, okay, I'm a military spouse and I'm a painter, I'm a runner, I'm a whatever, I'm a mother, like, just identifying all those other aspects of your personality that doesn't have to be dictated by your status as a military spouse or as an active duty member.
Yeah, I think that the most important word that you said was "and," because I think a lot of us like to say, I am whatever, but and it's not a but, it is I am a mother and I am a writer and I am a protector and a provider.
Yeah,
and finding your "and" is so important.
Absolutely. And especially for writers, if you aspire to be a writer and you write, you're a writer. You don't need anyone else's sign off. You don't need a publishing contract. You don't need anyone else's validation. If you're writing just for you in a journal and you enjoy it, then you're a writer, So bringing that validation from external to internal is extremely important as well, because you can validate yourself. You don't need, and I think in the age of social, that's very difficult to find that, because we want the likes and the clicks and the engagement, but that crap doesn't matter. It really doesn't. What matters is you're doing it for yourself, to understand yourself better, to progress your personal goals, and to find out who you are.
Great. We're running low on time. So I kind of want to ask you the same question I ask all the guests. If there were 2 or 3 things that you want service members to remember as they prepare for their own transition, what are they?
There are a lot of things that I would say, but if I had to narrow it down to just a couple, I would say, first and foremost, that you don't have to have it all figured out in the day that you leave. You're not going to have it all figured out. So go ahead and wipe that expectation off your map entirely. The transition does not end when you get your first job, when you get your acceptance letter to a college, when you take your gap year. It doesn't end on that ETS or on that retirement date. In fact, I would argue it doesn't end. You are constantly learning and growing, as is everybody else. What we have that's unique is this shared experience of military service, and that bonds us as a community. So the second thing I would say is use your community, but don't be in competition with them. Your traumatic experience does not need to be one-upped by somebody else's traumatic experience. We are not in a race to the bottom to see who's the most broken, to see who's been the most traumatized, to see who has the most kick-ass deployment story or the best "there I was" story. All those are fine, and certainly you should share those within a trusted group, but with the intention to share your lived experience and not to one-up or to compare yourself to anybody else. Because our community is the best source of you learning who you are. It is the best source of finding that camaraderie on the outside, because it does continue. Just because you're not in the armed services anymore doesn't mean that you can't find that brotherhood and sisterhood in our veteran community. But you have to set aside the ego that a lot of us come out with, and you have to set aside some of those preconceived notions about what it means to be a vet, and you have to carve out your own path and use our community to help you do that, because all of us have been there and done that. And yeah, I know it's my information is probably dated. I was out 8 years ago, but a lot of the commonalities that are just truths for us as human beings is going to be the same. The same struggles that we, have today they're everlasting. They don't change over time. So yes, your particular circumstance may be new, but chances are what you're feeling, what you're going through is not new at all. And so you can really benefit from the experiences of others who've been there.
Sam, how can people follow your content or get in touch with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I usually am fairly active there. I try to post somewhat regularly, depending on my workload and life load at the time, but that's normally where I hang out. I try not to, I'm not a big social user otherwise.
No, that's a good thing. You focus your content in the right areas. Sam, thank you so much for coming on. This has been very informative. And you're again, great storyteller. You're very eloquent. And as Sis alluded to, you're thorough too. So, hey, look, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll be in touch. And Sam has left the virtual studio. That was a great recording.
That was a great recording. God, she is really good at speaking.
She is, isn't she? She's good at storytelling. She's very articulate. And I think she did a little prep work before, but I mean, I respect that too, because I think it was very valuable information. Anything you thought stood out?
So much, because I took so many notes and I kept making all these like circles of this is good, this is good, this is good. And I'm like, oh gosh. And I was going to ask a question. And like I said, she was already answering them.
Yeah. Because
it's just, there was a beginning, middle, and end of everything that she was saying. But there are a few things that really stood out to me. So, deliberately closing the chapter of your transition is so important. And I think that that's so true. I mean, I know I can relate to that going into my own transition of 16 years in hospitality and then overnight, almost literally going into a corporate workforce and having that mentality and having to switch it so quickly and not giving myself time to transition into it. It really was hard to get used to the new structure of life that I was pursuing. And then I did feel like I missed out on a little bit because I didn't deliberately close that chapter of something that I knew for so long. So that was one of the big things that stood out that she mentioned. And another one is you as being in the military have this amazing shared experience, and you all might be doing something totally different in different branches, but your community is way bigger than my community. My community is much smaller, and I have to do a lot of searching out to find people that I can relate to, because not a lot of people have my experience, but you have this amazing community of shared experience people that don't ever forget that, because you are not alone. And I know we say that and it's very blasé, but it's true. You're not. And I think that if you do lean on that, it's going to be super helpful.
No, I find it interesting that you can relate to a transition, like a career transition. And I think it's important for all of us to know that while a military transition is very unique, mostly because we're indoctrinated, we have a culture that is very unique. We have jobs that many of us have jobs, and I say us, the royal us, have jobs that have inherent risks that you're not going to see in other places. You also speak from a position of having gone through a transition as well. So I find that commonality interesting. One of the things, I'll only mention one thing, and it was something that she mentioned at the very end, and she talked about identity. Now, I know that she was talking about having a multifaceted identity as in where she's at in her life right now, which is communications manager for a Fortune 100 company, but also a children's book author, but also a proud mom, also a military spouse, and just having many facets to that identity. I think that's extremely important for anybody, even in the military. I will tell you, I've learned the hard way that it's extremely necessary. You fall in love with something that can't love you back. That's why I'll say I really like being a Marine officer, being in the Marine Corps, being surrounded by Marines. I don't necessarily love it because it doesn't love me back. And I learned the hard way. And I think I've been spending a lot of time, whether it's developing a new hobby or even just podcasting. I mean, I think I like that being part of a multifaceted identity, because when I have to take one off, I won't be left with nothing. And so I think that's important as we all think about our transition. And I don't speak from experience. I haven't done it yet, but just listening to others, including Sam today, it's definitely something to consider. Find a way to make yourself have a diverse set of identities that make up you, a unique person, so that you're not relying on one of those for your own mental health and well-being. And that's it. That's all we got. Did you like it? Did you like what you heard? Have you given us a 5-star review yet? If you've listened to us twice, please give us a 5-star review. Bring it. Apple Podcasts. Yes, you got to you can scroll down. You need to scroll down most of the time. Go to our site on Apple. You can go to do it on iHeartRadio. You can do it on Spotify, and we're on YouTube. So you can follow our content, give us a thumbs up. We don't make money off of this, but what it does do is it helps us beat the metrics, so that when somebody puts in new mission, we might be the first thing that pops up in the search engine. And recently discovered through a media agent that we are in the top 250 global career development podcasts. So yeah,
Really?
not bad.
That's great.
We've got downloads in random places across the world, including Asia and the Middle East. I don't know how it happens. I'm guessing it's a service member that's deployed. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just taking a shot, but who cares?
Let's just go for it.
It's great. And by liking our content or giving us a review and beating the metrics, you're just simply putting the information in the hands of those that could benefit from it as they prepare, to embark on their transition. So if you like what you heard, like us. If you have any questions, you can email us at newmissionct@gmail.com, or you could find my sis, Alexandra Caprellian, or myself on LinkedIn. Hey, shoot us a message. Let us know what you think, maybe who you want us to interview next. Hey, we're down for anything. We're all about continuous process improvement, even in this podcast. If you're preparing for your own transition, know that I'm right there with you. So until next time, stay focused.